for themselves as some of the baddest dudes around, and Nakai was their leader. By the mid-90s, Akira and his crew started appearing in Japanese car mags alongside their drift cars. The Rough World crew's AE86s looked different than other cars they were sharing the spotlight with. These cars looked aggressive, yet elegant, with their mismatched wheels, big old wangs, and of course, the digital Rough World sticker on the windshield. They really did look more rough than the cars that they were sharing the spotlight. These fender flares were an homage to the race-proven touring car shapes of the early 90s. Even the 205mm wide tires were considered really wide back then. I mean, a stock 2020 Corolla has 225s right now, so they're not that wide, but back then they were wide. Nakai-san loved wrenching on these JDM classics, turning them into drift missiles and time attack cars, but there was one thing that really stuck with him since his childhood, and that was his love for Porsches. You guys probably could have guessed that, though. Despite coming of age in Japan during what is undoubtedly the golden era of JDM cars, Nakai had a bit of a wandering eye when it came to European cars with engines in the wrong place. Ever since he was a child, Nakai had been a fan of Porsches. So it was quite serendipitous when a damaged 911 showed up at his shop. Little did he know, this would be the car that would make him and Rough World famous. Chapter 2. Can I get a Stella Artois? You want a Stella? 2 Stellas. Can I get a 2 Stella? Just 1 Stella. 1 Stella Artois? 1 Stella Artois. If there's one car that completely sums up Nakai-san, it's this car. This 1985 Porsche 911 started its second life when it rolled into the shop that Nakai was working at, badly damaged. Now, rather than fix it up, Nakai bought it from the owner to use as a track car. This wasn't his first experience with the Porsche. His involvement with the Stuttgart Stallions had been building throughout the 90s, but this was the first one that he ever owned. The first one that he had free reign to make whatever he wanted. Now, a lot of classic 911s, especially nowadays, live in heated garages with, freaking moisture control or whatever. And they're only driven to cars and coffees. Then they're washed and put back in the garage. Now, Nakai wasn't interested in that. No, he wanted a car that he could take to the track and beat the ever-loving hell out of. So he did what he does best. He took what he knew about tuning Japanese cars and applied it to his new Porsche. He installed Aragasta coilovers and dropped it down a ton. He installed massive endless brakes that were stuffed behind 18-inch Workmeister wheels. This is like the creme de la creme of Japanese parts that he's throwing at this German car. He looked to his friends over at Promodet, a shop in a neighboring prefecture, to help build the engine out. The Porsche Flat 6 was tuned to make 360 buff, just shiny Japanese stallions with a red line of 8,500 RPM. To be a force on the track, Nakai went about stripping everything down in order to cut weight. The dash, gone. The roof, gone. The doors, gone. Replaced with carbon fiber. He even went so far as to replace the stock transmission with a 5-speed from a Porsche 915 because it saves weight and space. By the end, he had cut 800 pounds of weight from the already light car, making it an incredible 2,100 pounds. In his heyday, Nolan could deadlift this car. But if it weren't for the work that he did on the body, I probably wouldn't be making a video about the guy right now. In a move that would give a Porsche purist a heart attack, Nakai cut into the fenders with an air saw. Not only that, he chose to forego conventional fabrication techniques and did it by hand. Nakai put on massive custom carbon fiber fenders mimicking the 993 GT2 race cars of the 90s with his own personal touch, hand-spaced rivets. Then he threw on a custom-made wing that is cartoonishly big, but somehow it works. Now, he thought that the Rough World sticker that had adorned his cars in the past might seem a little out of place on this car, so he translated Rough World to German, and that's how it became Rauh-Welt Some people would rack their brains coming up with a sick name for their car. Nakai, although very opinionated, you can see that in all those other videos with him in it I was talking about, is a quiet man with simple taste. He chose to name his car after his favorite beer, Stella Artois, one that he discovered on a trip to Belgium as a young man. Now, this started out as a passion project for Nakai-san, but what he would learn later is that this is the only advertising he would ever have to do for what became a hugely successful business. Chapter 3, Coming to America. By the mid-2000s, Nakai was making a name for himself and his brand outside of his home in Chiba, Japan. Despite not marketing the company, which was now officially named RWB, or Rauh-Welt Begriff, German for Rough World Understanding, which is the coolest freaking name I've ever heard, and this is like the 153rd episode of this show. Thanks to articles like the ones written by Dino at Speedhunters and websites like Fatlace and Auto Otaku, the world was exposed to these insane Porsche builds. Nowadays, Nakai, along with people like Magnus Walker and Rod Emery, have made the outlaw Porsche style mainstream, but at this time, desecrating an air-cooled Porsche was seen as blasphemous. Whether the press was good or bad, it was working for Nakai. Word of RWB kept spreading and eventually reached entrepreneurs and Porsche enthusiasts Mark Arsenal and Brian Scotto. Mark was running Fatlace and Illest, and Brian, you may know him as the co-founder of Hoonigan, but back then, he was running a magazine called 0 to 60. So it was quite serendipitous. That's the second time you've used that word. Did you just learn it or something? Thank you for noticing. Yes, my girlfriend got me a word of the day calendar, and it is quite flossinosinehilapidelicious. What I'm saying is, it was good timing that RWB was looking to branch off and do work outside of Japan. So RWB rep Toshiya Ichiraku got Nakai to agree to come build a few cars in America. Nakai traveled to Mark's shop in San Mateo, named the Fatlace Paddock, which would end up being the official US distributor for RWB. Scotto ended up being the only one who could make it that weekend. So him and Nakai went about figuring out what they were gonna do with his 964.
What's up, Brian Scotto here from Hoonigan, and this, my RWB. This car was built in late 2011. It is one of the first 2 RWBs built in America. I was working at a magazine called 0 to 60. During that time, we did a feature story on Rauh-Welt. It was one of the first feature stories done in the United States. Actually, I think it was the first. So when Ken Block and I were about to launch Hoonigan, we were thinking what would be a cool project to put together, something that was separate from what Ken was doing. And I already had a 1991 911 Turbo. We built this car. Mark built a signal green C4. They were the first 2 cars built here in the US. Nakai ended up dubbing this look and style after we built it street style. What street style was having less aggressive kind of front lip. So on the other ones, it was an add-on rubber flap that goes here. The double stacked side skirts didn't have those. So VWs, especially like Mark 3s, you know what I'm talking about, Pumphrey, Mark 3s, of course, always had lower skirts kind of painted black with like the Euro trim, and it was one of the things that I always liked about the car. So that was the first little piece, and then the second Volkswagen homage are these, known in the Volkswagen world as crosshairs. My buddy Mike Campbell helped me make these, a little nod to my Volkswagen days. This is actually an original turbo car, an Andy Al kit turbo car, which for some purists was a huge bummer that I cut this car up to make an RWB, but whatever. It's kind of crazy to own one of the early RWBs. What RWBs were and what they meant to me in 2011 when this car was built is probably a lot different than what a lot of people see RWBs as now. There weren't really any show car RWBs. There was the guys racing in Japan, and then there were these cars. Almost 10 years later, still love the car, still happy that I built it. Still a fun car to drive.
By the end of the weekend, Nakai had completed his first 2 911 builds outside of Japan. He named Scotto's Turbo 964 Hoonigan to coincide with the launch of Hoonigan. And he named Mark Arsenal's 911 after his new favorite internet radio station, Pandora One. And once again, Nakai-san knocked it out of the apart. Up until now, RWB had been a bit of a secret, an underground tuner that made cars that looked like 90s race cars for the street. Things were about to change for Nakai. It was this exposure, plus another unforeseen factor, that would bring Rauh-Welt Begriff to the world stage. Chapter 4, the Akira Nakai experience. Now, around the mid to late 2000s, the value of air-cooled Porsches dropped drastically. Now, you can barely find a good 911 for under $50,000, but then they could be bought for dirt cheap.
What, like $1,500, $2,500? What are we talking here?
Nah, more like $15,000, $25,000.
We need to work on your definition of cheap, my friend.
JPEGs and .movs of the white Hoonigan 911 and green Pandora 1 became hugely popular as they were shared across car forums and blogs and eventually social media. Younger enthusiasts who had grown up with the JDM cars of the 90s, aka most of us, loved the look of these cars. But the first time I saw an RWB Porsche was on Speedhunters, and I was like, what the frig is that? I knew that there were going to be a bunch of guys who did not like this, and that made me love it, because pissing off guys like my dad has just, kind of been my go-to my entire life. But there was one group that absolutely hated RWBs, Porsche purists. Old, rich, mayonnaise-y guys denounced the work Nakai was doing to the dwindling stock of air-cooled 911s. Hide your air-cooled Porsches, they protested. In their minds, it was better to buy these classic sports cars and keep them hidden away in a garage in freaking Rancho Palos Verdes or something until they could see a return on their investment, officially driving up the price. But in Nakai's mind, these were cars that should be driven and raced and enjoyed, and his modifications helped them drive better than ever, whether purists want to admit it or not. A widened wheelbase along with super fat tires made these cars handle better than the originals. Ask anyone who drives an RWB. It's an experience unlike any other. Speaking of experience, we can't do a video on RWB without talking about Nakai-san's modification process. You've probably seen a million videos of this process. I know that I have, but that doesn't take away from how amazing Nakai's skill with a pneumatic air saw is. He lines it up with his eyes, marks it out, and just starts cutting. Other people might take hours or even days to properly make sure that their cuts are precise, but Nakai takes about 10 minutes. I trust my eye and I cut, he says. Now, you may have heard, in order to get Nakai to make you one of these cars, you need to provide a carton of cigarettes, a case of Mexican Coke, and a leather armchair for the master to sit in. Now, that's all been blown way out of proportion, apparently. In reality, those are just things that Nakai likes. If you want to get them, then that's called being nice. Since there's been so many videos about his process, like this one from Poison Studio, this legend just kept getting perpetuated. He doesn't require any of those things to be there when he starts working. But if you're hosting him, you might want to give Nakai things that make him happy. And those things are cokes and smokes. Another myth is that Nakai does what he wants to your Porsche and you don't have a say. In reality, he's open to most things, but you don't really pay for an RWB to not get an RWB. You can basically get whatever you want now. Just listen to my good friend Rutledge Wood on this really, really poorly filmed self-tape.
Don't make fun of my camera work, all right? I'm doing the best I can. I'm on an iPhone. What's up, donut? It's your buddy Rutledge Wood. Pardon my hair, y'all. Quarantine here is pretty serious. This is my RWB. I was so excited that you guys asked me to show it off, so this is it. It started life as a 1986 Carrera. Had the 3.2 in there. We pulled the 3.2 out, sold that, called Summit Racing, got a 525 horse LS3 that we put in the back. Ordered the kit and everything from Japan.
I wouldn't mind having one of those, bro.
You
make mine red, you feel me?
Which is exactly like, tell me what you want. How do you want to build this? We made this look like a 73 RSR was kind of our goal. 911 headlights. Lee made these incredible bi-LED headlights. I did these custom Forge Line wheels, which have a center lock on them. Big Brembo brakes behind there, KW suspension. I assume this is what y'all want to see though. This is the Summit Racing GM Performance 525 horse crate
Damn.
motor LS3. It's got MagnaFlow headers on there, which are pointed towards the front of the car, and then Richard Wadas from MagnaFlow built this awesome bimodal exhaust. Typically, the waiting list ends up being about a year. The parts get sent to you, all the body parts, and you paint them in the car, and then Nakai shows up and he assembles the whole car in front of you in 2 days. Nakai showed up with his suitcase of tools, and in like 4 minutes had cut 70% of this fiberglass piece off and had already mounted the light in what would have taken me days. Like, he's just that connected with the car. It was such a cool thing to be a part of. I love the sort of community that RWB has made. The process was wild, and it felt like it took a long time in some areas, and in other times that 2-day build went by like that. But I know that I have a one-of-one bespoke car that's mine forever, and it's insane. If you checked out the build video we did, it's on YouTube. It's also on my Instagram. For me, the coolest part was I used to play with cars like this when I was a kid with Hot Wheels, and now I own a real-life Hot Wheels car.
Builds, car enthusiasts around the globe have come to agree that the cars RWB modifies are friggin' sick. And I say cars because they're not just Porsches. RWB has branched off from 930s, 964s, and 993s to build a few Mercedes and an old Beetle and a new Beetle for my friend Tanner Faust. After all, Porsches are just Beetles with 2 more cylinders. RWB cars have appeared in video games like Need for Speed and CSR2. RWB races are now held regularly in Japan, named after the fake tire company that Nakai spray paints on all RWB builds. Idlers. Yes, that is a fake company, but it's cool as hell. I love that he made up a fake tire company. And Nakai-san rarely misses a race. You might find him there in his new build, a ridiculous wide-body 993 named Rotana with an insane double wing and a big old turbo hanging out the back. The Rauh-Welt crew is busier than ever. Nowadays, they're building 40 to 50 cars a year, most within a weekend. Some people might find them polarizing, but the wait list to get one of these built is over a year long, so some people have to love them. I love them. These cars were built because one quiet guy who loves Porsches wanted his car to look cool and go fast. And that's what they've been doing ever since.
Man, I'd love to get my car built like that, bro. Like, let me get a Porsche that's built like that, man. I'll be like, skirt, skirt. Bro, dude's just cutting, bro. Just going to work, bro. No tools, no nothing, bro. I just got this shit from Home Depot, bro. I'm ready to cut this shit up.